Welcome to the Future of Work Live. Hosted by Mark Salisbury, author of the new book, Socrates Digital for Learning and Problem Solving. Each 25-minute episode with Mark and his guests prepares you for the upcoming new world of work.
Welcome to the Future of Work Live. I'm Mark Salisbury, your host. Today, Santiago Mejia is my guest, and he'll discuss what Socrates would tell us about designing intelligent machines. All right, so before we bring Santiago out here, here's a little bit about him. He earned a PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago in 2016 and joined the Gabelli School of Business in 2017 as an assistant professor of business ethics. He's developing a project showing that shareholder primacy, the view according to which companies should be managed in the interest of shareholders, is ethically legitimate, but imposes obligations that are typically acknowledged. He's also exploring what Socratic ignorance, the view that the highest form of human wisdom consists in the recognition of one's ignorance, how this may contribute to the scholarship of fields such as artificial intelligence, leadership, and meaningful work. He's interested in the nature of character and ethical development, particularly within organizations. Professor Mejia has been awarded the Fordham's Distinguished Research Award for Junior Faculty in 2021. The Business Ethics Quarterly Award in 2019, and the Society of Business Ethics Founders Award in 2016. Please join me in welcoming Santiago. And here's where I bring him out. And I think
can you hear me?
We hear you, I think. Yes, okay.
Okay, terrific.
For those people at home who are, how do we put on such a high quality broadcast? We always go through it a little bit ahead of time so we can use our time wisely. But the other thing is that consistently is we have no trouble in the dry run with the technology. But as soon as we go live, there's always a bugaboo. So we are having trouble with the microphone. But Santiago, I'm going to go ahead and get us going here. And of course, this is you. This is your tag here. But let's start with the question, why is Socratic ignorance important?
Thank you, Mark. To be joining you and your guest today. So Socrates is important because it brings out a really interesting and under theorized way of understanding ignorance, but also more important wisdom. Just start by about
Santiago, if I could interrupt just for a second, we're getting a little bit of feedback from yours. Although you have really important words, we're hearing them twice, which is probably good for people like me, but maybe not a greater audience. So maybe there's a little.
Yeah. Let me see if you can see the microphone. Can you hear me better in this way?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'll go without the microphone. So what I was saying is that Socratic ignorance is a form of wisdom that is under and kind of not quite in people's minds what wisdom can amount to. Can you hear me well?
Yes. There's a little bit of background scratching, but I think it's working.
Okay. Let me tell you a short story to illustrate Socratic ignorance. A friend of Socrates, the Delphi oracle, and asked him the question like, is there any wiser than Socrates? And the oracle said no. When he was told that the oracle had said that there was no one wiser than him, absolutely perplexed because he thought he's not wise. His strategy to sort of like recognize, understand what the oracle was trying to sort of like show what was wrong, which is the way of the oracle. So he went to politics, asking the kind of things they're supposed to know. And in the patients he really didn't know. although they thought they do. Talk to generals about, say, for instance, things that they should know, like, for instance, courage. That what courage was. He went to talk to priests, the nature of piety, that they didn't know the nature of piety. And after going to talk with a number of different people who claimed to know some of the areas of expertise that they endorsed, he recognized that they didn't know, like he didn't know. But there was a difference between both of them. Namely, he recognized that he didn't know what other people didn't recognize. They didn't know. What that means is that he reckoned, if the oracle was right, is because his only form of wisdom was the highest form of wisdom that a human can aspire to, was precisely a recognition of his ignorance. Now, if you think about wisdom in that way, it, I think, opens up a world of possibilities to think about what should we aspire to be doing when we're trying to achieve wisdom, and in general, what should we be aspiring to be doing when we're sort of thinking about what a human life and human excellence amounts to. And now, once you recognize that wisdom, I think it opens up different ways of thinking about a variety of leadership, artificial intelligence in particular. I've done some work on that. The future of work, and also just a flow. Does that help?
Yeah, it does help. And we still seem to have a little bit of echo. I don't know quite what it is. It's some kind of feedback. It's funny, when you and I did it earlier, you came over clear. And so I think it's one of those things where we always try a different connection to make sure we have a good one, and it doesn't work quite as well. But anyway, the thing that struck me around Socratic ignorance is it's really kind of a form of emotional intelligence for our leaders, right? In a sense that, one of the things is that one of the ways to get feedback and get the input of people is to admit you don't know everything as a leader. And so I think that's a very powerful thing that good leaders know. They know this in a sense. And then I think we all know someone who doesn't have any of this, right? We all have an Uncle Fred that comes to our Easter dinner, and he knows everything about everything. You want to just tell him, there's this thing called Socratic ignorance. Have you heard about it? And of course, he would say, absolutely, but miss the point. So anyway, how does all of this relate to really the future of work, do you think, Santiago?
So it connects, and I'm trying my headphones to see is this any
Speak more slowly. Does it make any difference?
A little bit, I think. Yeah.
Okay. If not, I'll try this. There's at least two ways in which Socratic ignorance makes us think different nature of work, and both are quite different. So the first has to do, and you were touching on that earlier, on the nature of leadership. Socratic, I think, when you take it seriously, differently, Socratic wisdom, takes thinking about leadership in a way where you're not supposed to be the person who knows, but rather you're meant to call in the organization form of unknown, a form that tries to like in conventional understandings. Things like doing so opens up interesting area of creativity, sort of like releases forms of managerial leadership have to do doing things differently. It's not exactly undermine authority, but not be tacitly giving in to whatever authorities give you. Also, and I think this is really critical to the project of Socrates. It also puts the emphasis on what's the ultimate aim of human, and also corporate given that organization. And in getting people much more proactive, thinking about what's the purpose of the corporation, what's the purpose of this particular enterprise organization. It needs people, I think, to think much more attentively about what they should be, where the organization should be headed. Where it's a matter of giving returns, but much more broad what organizations and trying to achieve. The other way which it connects with the future of work, and this is quite different, has to do with like the potential that intelligence has to convey lots of jobs. Now, it's a big debate whether intelligence, at least how as we know it, will eventually take up most of the jobs. Not, I think there's compelling arguments, not controversial, not irrefutable, but compelling argument to think that intelligence, unlike many other forms of technological developments, might actually create a massive unemployment. Now, I've argued that in particular, plays a really critical role in how we work as a society. We kind of make weekends of our lives partly work. That kind of work plays a really critical role in how we understand it. When we're kids, we're thinking about getting some education to go work, and then we spend a lot of our working daily lives working, and then eventually we retire. But work is like this epicenter around which we are heading as up, and then sort of like fading out as we grow old. And if we enter a time of technological unemployment, that could cause significant, like a crisis of intelligibility, a crisis of understanding what it is to live a flourishing life. Because work, I think, plays a really critical role in how we understand a flourishing life to be. And what's interesting about Socrates is that instead of trying to find a sort of like new meaning, he wanted to sort of like just be able to fully recognize, fully live with this space of unknowingness, of not exactly knowing what's the meaning of life, not exactly knowing what should we be doing, and use that as a source of energy to sort of like to think and reflect about human flourishing and human agency. So that's two ways in which I think Socrates' work, and particularly the notion of Socratic wisdom that is associated with this notion of ignorance, can help us think differently about work and the future of work.
Yes, and I think so on a very pragmatic and basic way. I think it allows us to leave our biases behind, our assumptions that we make about things, and we can approach things like with an open-mindedness that maybe we couldn't if we didn't adopt this kind of idea of Socratic ignorance. I think because what I see with it is it's that you don't really start moving more towards making conclusions until you verify you actually have some data and you verify the assumptions that you're making and whatever concepts you're using to be able to frame the situation you're looking at. Once you go through those, you say, I don't really know anything. I'm starting from ground one. It seems like it would be a great way to foster innovation. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you brought all these points up. So the Socratic kind of like endeavor is a highly critical one, where he's constantly challenging others about their views, and I think he's also, and that's come from his own recognition of challenging himself, and that essentially is going to sort of like leave you or undermine significantly the kind of bias you might have, and in many of those biases will sort of like come up as precisely. As you're kind of like no longer just closing the follow-your idea that you did. I think that opens up also room for creativity, room for things in a very right. When you think you know, you should leave. When you think you know, you should work. Know how a particular will be doing things. Then you're just following that particular script. But when you sort of like recognize through questioning some of the foundations of those kind of like response you have or those skills, you then opens up spaces for thinking differently. So I think Socratic is significantly enhanced activity as you're saying, and also new possibility, and also as I said earlier, kind of like helps us identify our biases and also to a certain extent combat them.
Okay. And I want to get to the question I find fascinating that we had talked about before the show, and that is how Socratic ignorance can be incorporated into these intelligent machines that we build. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, this is like I think a fascinating area of research. Artificial intelligence is impressive in the kind of experiments that it is, right. That it has an ability to recognize kind of like different things. For instance, in pictures, like really good, but also how it can actually play games, many of which were thought to be very very difficult to program. And but I think Socrates help us see something that is in the idea of intelligence in intelligence. Artificial intelligence machines are able to sort of like predict, sometimes degree of probability, what is that you should play, or what is the kind of like picture falls into a particular category or not. And insofar that there's a certain sense in which it's very dogmatic about it, right? There's a certain sense in which the results that the artificial intelligence produces are said to be kind of like from a certain perspective stone, right? The artificial intelligence we have right now is not able to sort of question themselves. It's not sort of like reflect on what are the metrics being used, right? What are the metrics that guide those kind of like results? And insofar as that's missing, insofar as those artificial intelligence machines are not able to question the foundations on which their algorithms are based, I think there's something fundamental about intelligence that they're missing. And take seriously that Socrates was the wisest, it suggests that they are not wise, or at least they're missing the kind of wisdom that sort of characterizes Socrates, and that's the highest form of wisdom. And when you think about artificial intelligence on this slide, I think it sort of like opens up new ways of thinking about the next step of research, and how could engineers start thinking more creatively about other ways to program machines, and sort of like other ways of real intelligence might amount to.
Yeah. And I would say right now, until machines mature to that level, part of our responsibility as human beings in this equation, working with these intelligent algorithms, is that we have to bring that kind of Socratic ignorance to the equation ourselves, and basically kind of question what our machines tell us, and think about, are there other ways that we could basically approach this problem that's completely different than we did before. And so I think it's really fascinating. And then what you're advocating is we need to bring this kind of intelligence to our machines so that they can help us do this, right? And help us be able to see over what we always take for granted in our assumptions and all those kinds of things. Yeah, that is really, really interesting. I think we
And
have.
also,
Oh, go ahead.
like one thing that also comes up of that is a certain kind of humility. Once you recognize this kind of, recognize that you really don't know what excellence is or what should be the metrics, particular kind of humility, I think would be valuable for not only for us in general as a culture, but also for machines to have it.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's right. And so one of the things that I wanted to move to is how your work kind of converges here. And so I know that for you, you are kind of connecting ethics of corporate governance with this idea of Socratic ignorance. And so how does that come together in your own work?
Mm-hmm. So I haven't done a lot of work bringing those together. One way in which, so I've done a lot of work trying to articulate what's the purpose of a corporation, what's the purpose of the corporation. And there's a certain kind of like parallel between asking that question and asking the question of foundational question Socrates asked, namely, what is human flourishing? What does it mean to exceed or succeed as a human being? And insofar as I'm asking the question of what should be the aim of a corporation, you could think of a similar question. And I'm partly guided by the idea that if you ask the question properly, if you pursue properly that where the question leads you, you will sort of like end up in a place, Socrates' place, where you don't have clear final stance on it, but you recognize how any potential answer is highly problematic. And so kind of like also you might be able to open up new understandings of new forms of corporate governance. I haven't done a lot of work on that. My research will lead me to be able to explore them.
Okay. What gets you excited about this? See, this is I'm picking a question that we haven't talked about before. So, what's the thing that makes you get up in the morning, that makes you think about these things?
I mean, Socrates is just like a really truly fascinating figure, and I think this idea of ignorance, Socratic wisdom, that's very counter-intuitive, is completely paradoxical. And despite the fact that it's paradoxical, there's something that rings very true to me. And one thing that excites me about thinking of this kind of line of work or line of research is that it is something that I think we should be thinking much more proactively, and we're not thinking about it. Partly because it's paradoxical, and partly because it's more natural to think that leaders should have a clear sense of where they're going. Wisdom consists in knowing things and be able to sort of like give advice, instead of thinking of leadership and wisdom as these sort of like more unsettled, not firm kind of like ground. And just trying to sort of like open up that, getting people to sort of start about some of the things really excites me. If we could sort of like think much more proactively about what are the main goals that we should have, right? What are the metrics that should guide, for instance, what is an excellent corporation? In general, it's taken to be like an excellent corporation is a corporation that provides financial benefits, perhaps to shareholders. But why would that be the way of thinking about it? Why should corporations differently understand aims? And just insofar as my work might be able to sort of like open up people to think more proactively about these issues, and also in doing so come up with alternative ways of organizing ourselves, I think that would be great.
Yeah. That's interesting. I remember, and you shared a paper that you had done, and that's actually how I found you, was through your paper. But I remember in the title, and I don't remember the exact words, but it was moving from artificial intelligence to something called artificial wisdom. And I think that's what you're talking about, is to get to that next level with our intelligence machines. These are the things that we need to look at that Socrates taught us so long ago. So.
Yeah, and also I think it's just interesting that somebody who wrote in the 4th century before Christ, where there were no even steam motors, can contribute something so significant to this debate.
Yeah. Well, we have used up most of our time here, but we do have a minute or so here to basically cap the takeaway. And I put some words down that use Socratic ignorance when designing the next generation of intelligence machines. That's a takeaway. Would you like to elaborate on that just a little bit for our audience?
I would like to actually add something to it, and it's also use Socrates as an example of how to lead your life, which means ask yourself proactively, what should be the purpose of your life? And in doing so, ask it not with an expectation that you will get a firm answer, but more that you will open up, sort of like unsettle yourself about that might amount to. And I think if you think about that in your own life, I think you can also think about that about artificial intelligence and artificial machines.
Okay, very good. That's a nice cap on it. I'm sorry we had this a little bit of technical difficulty, but I think given the technical show and a great guest, I would go with the great guest every time. So you really fulfilled that great idea. So Santiago, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll look forward to more work from you in this area.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Mark, and yeah, I'm apologize for the glitches if they were my
Oh,
own.
these things happen. And I just want to remind people we're now on a path. So we'll be back next week, 1 o'clock Central Time, with a new episode of The Future of Work Live. We'll see you then.
You can find the Future of Work Live episodes in video and podcast format on www.marksalisbury.com. Additionally, YouTube hosts the video episodes on the Future of Work channel, and Apple, Spotify, and Google host the podcasts.